So what are we going to talk about then, lads? We're going to all things special that's happening tomorrow night. It's been a bit of a topsy-turvy weekend, in terms of results and people losing form, people getting form. I think Christmas is a big leveler for that. As much as you try to keep focused on the job, it has its distractions. It comes with its distractions and its fatigue levels on the back of Europe. So it's been an interesting week, isn't it? Yeah.
Do you think? Can't think what the word is. Is it as competitive as you can ever remember? I mean, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but those three results last weekend would suggest as much. And what's that? You mentioned Christmas, but does the salary cap start to come into that now, and clubs having to cut cloth?
I think you'll see a bit of that. Yeah, certainly. This is when you hear a bit more white noise. For clubs who want to do the right thing by the players, and if they're not able to afford them, keep them, it's around the next few weeks, or if not, the weeks just gone, where there'll be some difficult conversations and some brilliant ones, in equal measure, for people moving on and forward in their careers. But that naturally brings, as I say, it can be distractory noise in and around the changing rooms if you allow it, so that the ripple effect of the salary cap will show through, I believe, some of the team cohesion and ultimately performance on the field. The teams that are able to manage that white noise better, that are able to keep tight as they were, in the last weeks of pre-season, are the ones who will start to come through over the next month before we split again for the Six Nations.
Are you having to audit carefully at the moment as you kind of build the squad to next season? Are you having to make decisions that you'd rather not have to make for next season?
Yes.
I guess, obviously you're not going to name names, but in terms of maybe cutting players, losing players that you'd rather cut and lose next season.
Yeah, I think if you want the quality of squad, you have to have a smaller squad. There's certainly players that we would love to keep and retain, and we can't because of the salary cap, and that's happening now. And a lot of those contracts they signed, pre-COVID or just at the beginning of COVID, which allowed a 25% reduction in salary if there was to sign up then. These contracts are now coming out, or the people are coming out of these contracts. So if it was 5.8 for the last couple of years, it was 5.8 plus 25%. Most clubs signed those lads on for those 2 years. So you're actually losing in another million or so out the cap, realistically. So that makes it puts a squeeze in a little bit further. And when you say carefully, we meet every week. A meeting after this, we meet every week around retention, as much as recruitment. Yeah.
So can you put this might be a difficult, impossible question to answer, but can you put a pounds and pence number on how less you're having to operate with next season? Is it as simple as that?
Season 23-24, I think that's for the most part, because most clubs sign players on 2 to 3 year contracts. So what's 25% of 5.8? Do the maths. It's just over $1 million, isn't it? Probably most clubs are opening off $1 million less next year than what they are right now.
Right. Okay. And positively, I suppose we're seeing across the league, you having to use the academy more and grow your own and develop your own. Certainly, that's an impression I'm watching lots of clubs this.
Yeah, that is. And with all change, and it is change, if you embrace it, there's opportunity, isn't there? There's a chance to get ahead of the curve again. It does shake up the status quo. These kind of things do, and I think most clubs, as you know better than I do, because you get the opportunity to delve into them and to ask these kind of questions. But certainly, it was anyway. Like, I've always wanted to invest in your homegrown young talent. It's been obvious when I first came in. But you're forced to do that now as well, which I think is a really positive thing for the English game.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions from me, if I can, if Kieran and Adam will let me. I just that we're kind of halfway stage of the season. Al, are you ahead of the curve, below the curve, on the curve? How do you kind of reflect on the progress of the club over the first half of the season?
You see, we looked at it. We've looked at it a couple of times, and you have to sometimes step back on performances which were under par, which they have been this last couple of weeks, and to see what the bigger picture looks like. And we are satisfied with where we are in the bigger picture stakes, but I wouldn't say content. We feel like we've earned and deserve the standing we have in the Premiership. And yet we know there's still more growth in us, and obviously we're not there because we've suffered a couple of defeats on the road last couple of weeks. So there's still learning there for us to have.
And it's interesting with Wiggy coming in, and right at the start of his coaching career now, you will know how long it takes to put your mark on the club, on the way you play. Do you feel that the sale side we're watching now is an Al Sanderson sale side, and how long will it take Wiggy's Leicester to stop being Borth's Leicester, if you see what I mean?
I spoke to Wiggy, I spoke to him last week, because I think certain things like the relationship you have with mates, and he is a mate, should surpass professional competitiveness, let's call it that. It should do. And anyway, there's nothing I can tell him in a week that's going to make his team any better. or if anything, I'm probably more likely to derail what he's doing by accident, not by intent. I said, what?
Do you feel now that when you look at this team, that this is your team rather than one that you're still trying to mould into your team?
Yeah. I think vice versa. Like, for me to say it's an Alex Sanderson team, because I'm not going to accept the credit for how well the team has performed at times. Like, it truly is a group effort from the coaches that we have, but from the players who are driving it as well. So it takes some bedding in for them to understand me, for me to understand them. There's been a shift, quite a big shift in terms of the personnel of the squad, less so of the coaching staff, but the personnel of the squad. And then these players like a Roebuck or a Rafi Quirk or a Joe Carpenter, a Bev Rod, like I can go on, my cup runneth over. They mature as well, Nick. So as they're maturing and growing, the style and the mentality of the team shifts with them, as I have to. So it's a little bit more organic than saying, here's me, there's my stamp, do as I say, jump this high. It doesn't really work like that. But there has been a learning of each other and a growing together, I think, over the last 6 months to a style that is different from what it was. Still pragmatic, but I would say a little more ambitious, has been said about us, described about us this year in ways of what we do with the ball, and yet it retains its physicality, or has the ability to retain that, its physicality and its hard-nosed kind of northern grit, which I guess is the kind of elements that I'm most proud of, because that's what I lent into as a player. But it's got to be more than that, Nick, and it has to be. You can't win anything big just on the back of brute force. I know that. I'm starting to realise that.
No. It's really interesting you say that, because I just wonder when you're, and in terms of being the top man, you're still early days in the career. Are you moulding a team on the way you like to play rugby, or the players that you've got? Do you look at the stock and go, this is how we can play, or this is how I really want us to play?
I was fortunate playing and coaching at Saracens, and then coming here. I've been involved in two sides who my own kind of values, want and desires, things that excite me. I've been well aligned with the players that I've coached. I've yet to come to a scenario where I will have to completely change what I think is important about the wonderful game that we're involved in. And it was the same coming here. I walk into a team who kind of just bled.
Yeah.
bled a bit of violence, you know, which I can always affiliate with.
Yeah, brilliant. Last one from me. What could you possibly say to Wiggy this week that actually might make a difference as a mate?
Well, I texted him, I said, really well done, dead shut for your win, be a bit shitter. That's the advice I had for him. Look, George Ford called it. He spoke today within the team, and there was elements of the game when we played them down there which will be too obvious to Leicester, where they have to come up and be on the metal, and that's ones around the set piece, areas around the set piece, the physicality and the aerial battle. You know, it was a really hard fought game in those areas. We expect nothing less from them. I'm sure they're anticipating an angry Sale side who wants to respond from a couple of under par performances. He mentioned that back to us, so he knows what's coming, and we know where we have to step up.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers, Al. Thanks for your time.
Cheers, Nick.
Hi, just another one on Wiggy. When there's been a lot of chat about, you know, he's one of these guys who you say you always knew he was going to be a coach. When did you first recognise that he was a coach in waiting?
Oh, this is the point, coming back to what Nick said about, you know, your team. For the last probably four years, I'd say, in the last organisation, a lot of the detail, the stuff at the coalface, was from the likes of Wiggy. You know, Vaz had his two penneth, Marrow, but more so in the lineouts. But Wiggy was the one who I'd had to work very close with, because if you didn't work closely with him and you didn't take on his input, it could be quite diversive and distractory for you in training in terms of taking the lads with you. So it's important that you involve him. But no, what's quite obvious, he has a very sharp rugby brain, quite a practical as well, pragmatic rugby brain. So we used him back then to coach, to help us with our game model. And then from the last couple of years, I sat down with him on quite a few occasions and went through just some of the basic, my methodology of coaching and what I thought was important. And he was like a sponge then, so you could see he was taking it all in, and he was kind of armouring himself up to step into a coaching role as soon as he finished playing. And unfortunately, it's his coaching role now that's actually retired him from playing, isn't it? Because he's still got some good rugby in him, but when needs must and all that, he's answered the call, hasn't he?
And we know he's just seen a man who's back. How's he been over the last couple of weeks since he's been out?
Yeah, not great, because it was a big collision and he had stitches in his mouth. Yeah. You know, he'd much rather be with us playing against Toulouse and maybe coming up the road to Newcastle, but he hasn't been able to. So he hasn't been his usual self because of the nature of the injury. It means he had to down tools for just over a week. But then he comes back in and he does what he does. He galvanises people. And he comes in with a smile on his face and he trains like a legend. So I'm looking forward to seeing him go tomorrow.
Thanks, mate.
It was a really disappointing result, Alex, last Friday, 14-0 up at half-time and then not scoring a single point in the second half. You looked visibly quite frustrated, upset when you were being interviewed after the game. What did you say to the team immediately after the game? And when the whole squad reconvened at the start of this week, how had that kind of message changed in terms of looking to move on to this week?
I put it over to them, Kieran. You know, we always have a chat on the field after, and it's fortunately those conversations have been one of congratulations and well done and thanks for effort. This one was a bit different, but I think it's important that you're able to have those conversations, win or lose, because then at least you're sticking true to process. So I said, well, what do you think, boys? And that was what I was most encouraged by, even if it didn't come across in my face in the post-match. Ben Curry said, look, you know, let's not take any of the decisions as a reason why. Let's not look for injuries in the wall as an excuse. Let's look to each other within this circle and understand what we could have done better. Like, ask yourself, reflect on your own actions and what you said and what you did. And I thought that's brilliant, because already, even in the throes of frustration like I was, we all felt it, the first response or reaction was to reflect inwardly, introspect, and understand what they could have done differently. That's a big shift, that, from my understanding with this group. They're ready to take it on themselves and own it, which they did, right? And then Jono, who's, has been a great leader for us still, he said, look, let's not let the 2 weeks derail us from our belief in what we're building and how good we are. Keep the faith type message, which I think is also important, because you live week to week in this game. You're judged week to week. And sometimes that being in the moment, I know it's a bit cliche, but having to be in the moment for that next result to be the most important result, it can cloud your judgment of where you're at generally. And that's why I spoke to Nick before about having to step back and look at it. So it's on the back of those two things. I just asked them for a response, because you could sat over that over Christmas. You could sit in it and it can spoil your Christmas potentially, or you can come in on a Monday morning, kicking stones still and thinking about the one that got away, or you can come in, the alternative is to come in and respond positively, move on from it, continue to celebrate and support each other, bring effort to the job, to the training day, and make that purposeful. So I asked them to turn up with that attitude, and they did. They have. So, I've been really impressed with their maturity to be able to rock up on Monday and crack on. Not like nothing's happened, because it has, but to respond in the right way, in a positive way. So we've touched on that every day this week in terms of what a response looks like this weekend.
I know you said after the game that weren't interested in kind of trying to make excuses or trying to find external reasons. Do you think fatigue did play a part in that second half, considering how short a turnaround it was, playing Sunday afternoon in France and then Friday evening up in Newcastle? Yeah,
of course it did. Of course it did. Fatigue, and we had two go down in the warm-up, two internationals. Aka and Bev went down in the warm-up. And so your ability to maintain pressure through the set piece is affected, and it was set piece that was right at the nut of it, which affected our penalty count, our turnover ratio, and our kill zone conversion. But still, they are, for me, they are still excuses. You could turn around and say, look, it's because of these two things, and it's not. I still think we had the ability and the running in us to not just to close a game out, but probably to do more in that first half as well. Looking back at it,
in terms of an injury update, you mentioned both Bevan and Aka went down. Aka is in the squad this week. Bevan isn't. What's the nature of his injury?
Jeez, it's quite a common injury with loose heads of props or front rowers, but it was a freakish thing that happened in the warm-up. The scrum just wheeled, and I think Joe Jones got underneath him and popped a rib. So it's not actually the rib that pops, it's the cartilage in between the ribs. Really, really painful. Doesn't put you out for a long period of time. You can't do any more damage. It's just about pain thresholds. So, normally those things like 2 to 3 weeks.
Dan Dupree went off, I think, with an HIA. He's not in the squad this week. Is that, obviously, he's in the concussion protocol. And what's the latest with Tom Roebuck, Joe Carpenter, who also, both of those aren't in the squad for tomorrow night?
Dan went off with a suspected fractured metatarsal. I think that's the right word. That's on your finger, isn't it? One of your fingers.
Yeah, metatarsal.
Metatarsal, yeah, on his little knuckle there. So those things sometimes require getting wired. So he's having that looked at. Joe Carpenter was kind of up for selection with Joe. This was his first training week back. It was improbable isn't probable that he can play longer than 50, 60 minutes given his loading and our understanding of a hamstring tendon tear which he had, and him being young as well. So there's an element of, duty of care with him. Tom's a little bit longer, we think, another couple of weeks still. And I just don't think they properly assessed the severity of his ankle injury, as I said last week. Tom Roebuck. James is back. He's good as well. Sam James, if selected. Obviously Tom Curry's back in, having had a bit of a rest, if selected. Yeah, so we're stronger than we were last week in terms of personnel.
One positive that did come out of last week was Luke James returning for the first time since game week 2. That must have been a real positive to get him back, especially with Joe Carpenter being injured, Jason Woodward carrying it in at the moment.
Yeah, it's important to get people in the right positions. And I think he's established himself as an out-and-out fullback back end of last year and the start of this year. Just no one actually expected the meteoric rise of Joe Carpenter. So they'll be battling it out over the next few weeks.
In terms of a couple of other injuries, obviously Rafi and George, are they still on track for mid-January? Do you have, as we're now just a few weeks away from that, a specific date or a specific game that you think they might be back, whether that be, it's Harlequins the week after this weekend, Toulouse and Argo? You've got a specific game where we think one or both of them will be back for those games?
Yeah, Rafi before George, but only by a week or two, and Rafi hopefully for Europe, 1 or 2. Yeah, and if we can get, it could be. Yeah, I've got a missed call off Steve Borthwick, so that'll be interesting to see who he recruits for his. Do you know this, lads? Because you'll be able to help me out here. It's only 5 you can change. There's only 5 you can change in the squad. Boss.
Yeah. Well, I think the feeling was that is the agreement, but it was being reported that potentially there might be some more flexibility surrounding that rule being relaxed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, possibly. It's as it stands, it's 5 unenforced ones, plus if people are injured, but there's talk that he might get a bit more leeway. And then 6 Nations squad middle of Jan. EPS start of Jan, 6 Nations back the 16th.
Yeah, so George, it might be that he goes straight to England. They've got that training camp and the last week in Bath. The last week in January, which was playing Bath, which is what the game you're referring to.
Is that presumably a conversation you'll have with Steve about the fact that George has obviously been out a long, long time and how he integrates back in, or is that semi-out of your control? If Steve Borthwick wants to call George up to 6 Nations, that's kind of irrelevant. Well, not irrelevant to what you say, but if he wants to call him up, then even though he hasn't played since June, then that will be the case.
Both, Kieran. The answer is both. I will have the conversation, but it is equally out of my control if he calls him up.
Okay. Just one final one from me. Obviously, because of where I'm speaking, we do know the team news, and Andre Pollard is starting at 10 for Leicester. Have you prepared in the week thinking he might start, or is it kind of a more generic kind of plan for how you tackle Leicester? Yeah,
more a generic plan, really. I think the style of play has been effective for him, really effective for him. Whether it be Atkinson or Freddie Burns in that role, they've executed a similar game plan. And obviously there's always that need for contingency. Pollard's one of the world's best, isn't he? So we'll have a little chat about that tomorrow before we have our pre-match meal. But it's not something we've highlighted as a person to go after when you're not fully convinced that he could be starting done that before. It wrecks you when they don't start. Like you pinned all your hopes and dreams about really getting stuck into one person, opposition side, and they don't play. And you're like, well, what do we do now? Like, so the opposite of that's true also.
Final game of 2022 at home in front of what looks like it's going to be a really good crowd at home. I'm sure that you, along with the whole of our fan base, will want to go out to 2022 with a bang.
There's no better occasion, is there? The champions on your own turf, full house. I've got relatives and friends that have come out the woodwork. Like I haven't heard from them for months, and they've all said they want to come to this. So it's costing me a fortune, and we're getting 50% off as well. So it should be a great day for all. I'm sure it will be. You know, if you're just a rugby fan, it'll be a decent day, but hopefully for Sale supporters, even more so on the back of a decent performance, yeah.
Cheers, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Cheers, boys.
Cheers, boys. Thanks very much.
Al, sorry.